If you didn't notice, I kinda like movies. When I'm not watching VTubers or sitting in silence wondering why of all people God let oxygen enter my lungs, or doing both, I'm watching some classic cinema. I'm talking Once Upon a Time in the West, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Hiroshima Mon Amour. I'm talking Pink Flamingos. Yes, she did eat actual dog shit. Just take my word for it because I cannot show this on YouTube.
Condone first-degree murder. Advocate cannibalism. Eat shit. Filth are my politics. Filth is my life. Take whatever you like. Yes. How's this for a center spread?
But some of my favorite movies are those that take their time and let me sit with their characters. Those that are meditative enough to not let general audiences control the pace. One of my favorite filmmakers, Jim Jarmusch, knows this style perfectly. He allows his characters to breathe and let the audience soak in the atmosphere of the locations he shoots on. His films focus on humanity, culture, and culture clashes. Rather than make a traditional narrative film, Jarmusch lets his characters just kind of sit around and talk about stuff you'd probably hear on a usual day in town. And even with this style, he still makes great and entertaining films. His characters are authentic and quirky enough. It's not like a Wes Anderson or Tarantino film where those characters can only exist in their worlds. Jarmusch's characters actually live off and on screen, like actual people. Now there are moments where he drifts into absurdity or straight up genre play, but he maintains his humanity despite the surrounding flourishes. In his film Only Lovers Left Alive, he used the classic subgenre of vampire films and uses that to explore the passing of time and its effect on culture and media. Or in Dead Don't Die, where he used the whole zombies are coming to invade the town shtick to explore not only environmentalism, but how people flippantly react to disaster. Originally, I only liked Dead Don't Die because it was a little too on the nose, but looking back on it and rewatching it showed me that the obvious nature of the whole movie is kind of the point. That was the only time I questioned my love for one of Jarmusch's films, and I regret doing so. If we look at his entire filmography, he's directed around 12 films. 3 of them I'd give 10 out of 10 ratings to, honestly. Ghost Dog is a vibe that I will never not love. It has Wu-Tang Clan music, a slick and cool performance from the immensely underrated Forest Whitaker, and an amazing mixture of Japanese filmmaker Akira Kurosawa motifs and themes, along with modern aesthetics. Patterson might honestly be my favorite of the 3 masterpieces, being that it has everything I love from the filmmaker, but also a wonderful atmosphere that I absolutely live for. There's this love for humanity throughout the entire project that so deeply resonates with me. Oh, and Adam Driver owns his last name and becomes a bus driver. It's absolutely fantastic, I promise. But I do reserve some special attention for the focus of this video, that being Jarmusch's 1995 Western masterpiece, Dead Man. I love Westerns so much. I remember watching stuff like Gunsmoke or The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly with my grandpa way back in the early 2000s. Let's just say my tastes in entertainment have changed a little bit. However, my love for Westerns has never died, but it has definitely changed a bit. I used to love all of these Westerns highlighting the golden age of the West with all these heists and classic shootouts, but now I love stuff like Rio Bravo, Once Upon a Time in the West like I mentioned, and of course Dead Man, which all chronicled the collapse of the West and the rise of industrialization and the West's domestication. This kind of meditation is what I look to Jarmusch for, so it's perfect that he adapted this style to the classic American genre. It's also Italian, but because sometimes directors and actors would fly out to Italy and film spaghetti westerns with the Mario Brothers, but that's just a little tiny thing. We're not going to focus on that in this video. Unlike a lot of Jarmusch's films, Dead Man takes a far more spiritual approach. The film follows a man named William Blake as he travels to the town called, quite literally, Machine. Now, if that doesn't convince you that this movie is about Western industrialization, I don't know what I can do. His new accountant job happens to be stolen from him, and the girl he meets and eventually has sex with that night happens to be married as well. Let's just say he does not have the best of luck. Blake's encounter with the married woman and her depressing husband leads the husband to shoot his wife and Blake to fire back. The scene isn't depicted as a righteous one for Blake, neither does it villainize anyone. This is just an incredibly sad scene that shows the emotional distress present in this town. Blake then escapes the town and passes out near a river. The bullet which killed the married woman happened to wound Blake as well. But a Native American named Nobody happens to find him and try to get the bullet out of his chest. He is unable to take the bullet out of his chest though, and he finds that the man's already dead. So from here on out, Nobody guides Blake to essentially the afterlife. Obviously Blake isn't taking any of this, but it's this sort of clash between the literal world and the spiritual world, and that's what makes this film what it is. And honestly, what makes this journey to the afterlife more interesting is William Blake himself, which is also the name of a historical American artist and poet. The poetry of William Blake was largely misunderstood and ignored because of its progressive ideals at the time. His work begged people, particularly men, to ponder on their actions and understand their motives so they can change themselves, as well as the social order. This kind of person is not especially new to Jarmusch's work. In Patterson, Adam Driver's character is a poet documenting his own life and appreciating every facet of humanity and nature. This might only connect them through the idea of poetry, but Jarmusch has also made this kind of person his through line in his filmography. Almost every single character in his films is either an anachronism or generally an outsider. This is either from a cultural perspective or an ideological perspective. A character like Ghost Dog in, well, Ghost Dog, adores and lives by the samurai code and generally is a much more socially acceptable weeb. And because of this, he's in touch with his own town and his friends, but he keeps to himself and lives in secrecy. Kinda like Phoenix Jones, a man so devoted to his work that he forgot that randomly spraying people with pepper spray is, in fact, illegal. Honest mistake.
Phoenix Jones as he ran up to a group of men and women standing under the Alaskan Way Viaduct near Post Alley. Jones held out a can of pepper spray, then pulled the trigger. When officers arrived, they arrested him on 4 counts of assault. They also confiscated his yellow and black custom-made crime-fighting suit as evidence.
But with this kind of character that feels reminiscent of classic superheroes, it would be easy to fall into genre trappings or even unwarranted edgelord energy. Ghost Dog succeeded in this respect, making its samurai/mobster aesthetic feel genuinely cool and effective. Now, Deadman's portrayal of this kind of character is similar, but with the aesthetics of the Western genre instead. However, the main character is not just named William Blake, but he's also told that he's the reincarnation of the poet himself. This adds the previously mentioned spiritual factor. This element is introduced through Nobody, which might seem like a genre trapping of the classic Western, reducing Native Americans to shamans. Nobody, though, is a much more acceptable representation of the spiritualism present in Native American culture. Nobody is another character alongside William Blake that feels outcast from society. Since he's mixed with both native and white blood, there's an inherent cultural disconnect with both cultures. The white people that he tried to stay with abused him and eventually sent him off to England like a captured animal, and his tribe hated his mixed blood. Denied by both his tribe and the white people that he tried to live with, he was labeled
Exhibite! He who talks loud, saying nothing. They ridiculed me, my own people, and I was left to wander the earth alone. I am nobody.
These sort of cultural clashes are what make Jarmusch who he is as a director, as well as make this critique of the Western genre incredibly nuanced and authentic. Back to William Blake, though. The reveal that this character is actually William Blake instantly transports this world into a kind of purgatory, one where William Blake is a quote-unquote dead man who must pass on into the afterlife after Western history neglected his importance. Nobody being both a bridge between the two cultures and a bridge between mortality and the afterlife, guides Blake to his deathbed. There's a lot of flourishes I missed, but that's essentially the plot of the movie. Oh yeah, and then there's the bounty hunter characters that are typical to Westerns. Because Blake killed that previously mentioned husband that cried over his wife in the beginning of the film, the focal industrialist of Machine sends out bounty hunters to kill Blake. These are the representations of the Western world attempting to stop Blake in his tracks, and once again strip him of his spirituality. But even with these overwhelming concepts of industrialization and Westernization, the film doesn't entirely deny the Western world. Nobody and Blake accept their rifles and revolvers as tools for their journey, and they even accept the importance of tobacco, a crop so common in the West that it's pretty much entitled to that part of the world. Even if these items are owned by the Western world, they still use them. Nobody himself was raised in both cultures, indulging in old literature as well as its tribal activities. The film does not hate the West, but it does not love it either. Dead Man shows spiritualism and the more literal world of the West to say they both should be used hand in hand. People should be at peace in the nuances of culture, unlike Iggy Pop's bounty hunter character who hates even the idea of religion or anything outside the literal. Jarmusch takes a brutal approach to this character specifically, making him this murderous cannibal. This cannibalistic portrayal could be representative of Western culture literally cannibalizing itself to maintain its purity, separating itself from any other culture. It's gross for sure, but it's definitely an effective metaphor. As I've said, it's this clash of cultures that makes Jarmusch's films what they are. The look and sound of this film is what puts the icing on the cake for me though. The black and white cinematography harkens back to the westerns of the past, establishing the types of themes that might be explored. As I've mentioned, there's a lot of discussion over industrialization and the Western world generally decaying, but Dead Man also subverts these preconceptions with the portrayal of its Native American character, and the progressive understanding of culture and its nuances. The still cinematography also captures this seemingly never-ending feels of the forest, which gives off this purgatorial feel to it, as if to represent Blake's journey through his own purgatory. It's fittingly spiritual in that way. Now, we gotta talk about Neil Young's score, which I mean, come on, are you hearing this? Young's score makes this film feel so incredibly Western and so badass. When Blake kills these random bounty hunters and those electric guitar strums come in like,
You William Blake?
Yes, I am. Do you know my poetry?
that's so badass. I can't even with that. It feels so fitting in the atmosphere, and even though most of the themes are reused throughout the film, the purgatorial atmosphere kind of warrants it. No matter what though, Neil's strums will never not give me goosebumps. Dead Man is an incredible film from an incredible filmmaker. It somehow blends in everything I love about Jarmusch into a singular film, all the while being genuinely an amazing revisionist western, contemplating the spiritual and the literal. While the literal world may deny the spiritual, living between both is just like lying in an unshaken boat within the ever-shaking waters.